online book festival, children's book festival, brought to you in partnership with the Sue Atkins Book Club. Sue Atkins has brought together these amazing authors and writers on a whole variety of different topics, all with children at the centre. And the person we're speaking to next is not actually part of that, but is part of, in many ways, part of the independent thinking, the extended family, if you like, because so many of our associates have worked with Suzanne, have supported her, have shared platforms with her, and it's especially the sort of the link there through our, we call him Real David Cameron, to separate from some other guy you might have heard about. And it's such an important topic that Suzanne covers, and this book, The Little Iceberg, which I've heard about, but I've only sort of got around to reading just a couple of days ago, I just found incredibly moving. It's a moving book, and that is the images I find just as moving as the words. And then also there's a brilliant little bit at the back, the companion guide, and all about why the book has been written and what we can get out of it. But also, that's enough I'll say about it. So Suzanne, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you, about the work that you do, about trauma, about how you came to be writing the book, and why your name isn't on it, but who are these Nicky and Sylvia people?
Ian, it's lovely to be with all of you. I'm so excited to be part of this book festival, and just congratulations for pulling it all together. I think it's always helpful to know what resources are out there, what opportunities are out there to help children to step into life. And in the case of our book, to step into really tough feelings like grief and loss and loneliness and fear. And we launched this book, The Little Iceberg, last summer in the middle of lockdown. And we had already scheduled that to happen. And then, of course, COVID hit, and we decided to try getting it out there anyway. And of course, it's turned out to be even more important than we had originally predicted when we started putting together this project in 2018.
So tell us some of your work. How do you get to writing a book like this? Tell us about the work that you do, and also the fact that from your accent, people might think we're actually reaching out to you across the pond, but we're actually, well, I am, because I'm in Rotterdam, but across the channel and up a bit. So where are you based, and what is the work that you do?
I'm here in Dundee, up in Scotland, and I founded an organization called Connected Baby, who are the publishers of this book. And it's been lovely to turn my bookshelves into a bookshop behind me. And the book is written by Nicky Murray, who is a head teacher at Claypots Castle Primary here in Dundee. And it's illustrated by Sylvia Lynch, who is an artist that we found when we held a children's artist competition. So when we put this together, we held a competition for artists and illustrators to submit their drawings, and Sylvia came out of that. Sylvia is based in Northumberland. Nicky had written the story, and I thought it was a story really worth publishing. So we've been delighted to bring his story to a new way of talking about it and a wider audience by putting it together with Sylvia's drawings. And what it aims to do is to help us to think about trauma, loss, parting, the feelings that children often carry underneath that are hard sometimes for us to understand the behavior that children display with that, how to help them to talk about it. And this book helps them to do that. And I am delighted by the way in which it's been embraced by adoptive parents, parents whose children have lost people during COVID, schools and nurseries have really embraced it with whole school projects. The embracing of it has been even more exciting than I had originally hoped when we put it out.
And even translating into French, I noticed on Twitter just recently, you posted that a couple of minutes ago.
Well, Knightsbridge Primary, one of the many ways in which they engaged with the book was that they translated it into French. Lots of other schools, they've been so creative. So lots of activities around emotions, but schools have also put together projects on climate change and global warming and how icebergs form and how they melt. And they've used them in literacy and paying attention to stories and summaries and searching for clues in the text, in maths. I mean, schools and teachers are very creative.
Right.
For me, the way they've engaged with this book just illustrates this. So whole school projects have been used. In fact, if I just brought along some quotes, if I just read you one.
Yeah.
Ian. So Uphall Primany said, "We were inspired by the book and the children were able to explore their own emotions. It was perfect for our post-lockdown return to school."
Lovely. There's so much talk, certainly in England. I think Scotland's a little bit more aware about trauma, well, trauma-informed teaching. And I'll come back to what Connected Baby is all about. But in England, there's been such a push from the top about catch up. It's all about the literacy and the numeracy. These kids are falling behind. We must get them to catch up. There's this gap we've got to close, missing everything we know about what they really need, given the awful experiences that we've all gone through, and awful from whether it's death or whether it's isolation or whether it's just confusion. So tell us about Connected Baby, how that fits in, and then sort of feed that into the pandemic just briefly if you can, Suzanne.
Children's biology has been affected by the last year that we have all lived. So there are some children who have lived really scary lives because home was scary. We need to think about that. There's some children who lost grandparents, or they grieved not seeing friends, or they really miss their teachers. We need to think about those feelings because we need to support children in them. And if we ignore them and we just focus on attainment, we make life harder for children. We undermine their attainment potential. And trauma teaches us that. That's not new, but lots of schools and other adults have not had a chance to think about it. So what Connected Baby does is that we produce a range of resources. We're small, but we put our heart and soul into everything that we produce. We produce resources, we host events, and we stage exhibitions that help people to understand the power of connection. This is our first children's book. We're delighted that it has been embraced so warmly. And indeed, can I add that once we had the book and the companion guide that you talked about that goes with it in order to help adults to understand the metaphors in the story, in December, we came up with the Little Iceberg activity book.
Yeah.
And Jen Latrobe is here today. We worked with her in order to produce meditations using these themes to help schools to have a wider range of ways to engage. And can I just read you one more quote? Because I promised a young man, age 10, who we're going by the name of S, just to give you a sense of what it means to children. He said, "I have a copy of the Little Iceberg activity book, all my own, in my classroom. It was good to do after I read the story in my class. I liked doing the word search because it helped me look at the words after I'd read the story. And the picture of the little girl is beautiful because she looks like my friend." So that's the picture of the little girl emerging from the iceberg, because that's the metaphor. And so he just helps us to understand how children identify with this. And he concludes by saying, "I would give the activity book 10 out of 10. And I read that out loud so that we have a sense of what this means to children and that we can think more about how we help them to engage with big, tough feelings.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. That's lovely. And the activity book, then it becomes, this is my book, this is my work, this is my interaction with the story. It's not a community thing. We've had that. Now it's personal.
Exactly. It's full of word searches and picture maths and drawing faces. It's full of activities that really helped us to extend children's engagement with the story, because lots of them told us that they were really sad that it had come to an end. So we wanted to find ways to help them. And S gives us confidence that that was a great decision.
Nice one, S. Well done.
I hope he gets to see this. So proud.
It'll be on YouTube within the next few days, and you can see that. The word trauma, let's just briefly, let's understand what we mean by trauma. And can it be that one person's having a bad day is another person's trauma, or are there certain sort of categories? This is definitely trauma and this isn't. I know there's ACEs, there's adverse childhood experiences, but that's slightly different as well, I think. So just define trauma for me.
Ian, it's a great question. Trauma is how people experience the things that happen to them in life. And so if I just give an example of partying at the school gates, some children manage that from their parents okay. And for some children, it's incredibly difficult and they cry every day. And I hear from lots of adults who talk about, I cried every day for 3 years until I was 8 when my mom parted from me at the school gates. In fact, somebody tweeted me that yesterday, and then it emerges that he was a baby who was in NICU and would have had really difficult experiences early in his babyhood. So partings for him were incredibly painful, biologically unsettling, and we might call them traumatic. The thing that I find really interesting is that we don't normally use the word trauma to think about parting at the school gates. Mm. And for some people, it will be deeply uncomfortable that I'm even suggesting that. And in fact, some people may even say, that's too strong and I shouldn't do that. But when you listen to the stories of adults who can remember crying every day for 3 years when their mother left them at the school gate and the teacher got irritated with them because of that behavior, it starts to give us insights into the different ways that children experience life. We don't know what is happening for them at home. And the key thing is, if that has made your stress system more fragile, then you find it harder to handle the things that happen to you in life, even if they are ordinary things. We have heard that rates of domestic violence have gone up during COVID. There are lots of news reports now of mental health assessments for not just secondary pupils, enough of those, but also primary pupils. I'm also hearing stories of primary pupils being excluded from school. If we don't get interested in the behavior that leads to the sorts of things that you can be excluded for at the age of 5, that means we are not trauma informed. Mm-hmm. I think that the grown-ups have a responsibility to understand what the science is telling us about trauma and therefore to be trauma informed. And there are lots of examples now of lots of schools who are trauma informed, and many of them have used that basis to embrace this book and put together whole school projects. So it's entirely possible to do. It's just a matter of willpower.
And this idea that you might not call it trauma, and it might not be traumatic to you, but my brain, as far as my brain is concerned, it's traumatic. My physiological, neurological response, the way my brain is forming as a result of these experiences is outside of my control. And if that's the trauma response, it's the trauma response, whatever you call it.
Absolutely. So trauma is really individual, although we might get the idea that, okay, being in a household where there's domestic violence, isn't good for children. So we could, but if you have a safe person in your life, a safe base, and that might be your teacher, the domestic violence won't affect you as deeply as if you don't have anybody to help you with that. And so trauma is your personal experience of that. But if you don't have adults who get interested in children's personal experiences, then we don't have any hope of helping children. And we don't quite realize what is going on in their lives and deeper in their body. And then that has lifelong impacts, we now know.
And that's why the companion guide at the back of the book is so important, to guide whether it's the parent or the teacher through all the really rich seam of not only creativity, but the science behind trauma. So it allows them to unpick what seems quite a simple, almost melancholic story, but then a hopeful story at the end. But use that as your guide to unpick the science.
Read a teeny bit from one of them. There's insights on every single page. And so here's one about feeling alone. It can be uncomfortable and lonely when children have experienced trauma, and they become experts at isolation. So when they first meet a new person, they may not behave in a welcoming manner, which can make it awkward to get acquainted, just as the little bird in our story slipped when she first landed on the iceberg. Sometimes just being nearby and not doing very much can be the best way to help a child feel comfortable enough to become interested in you. And so every single one of the pages in our storybook are discussed in the companion guide.
Yep.
That people have can read underneath the metaphor that is this story to understand what they might take away and how they might use it in, in a range of ways.
Yeah, and the bird is just so. I mean, there aren't many storybooks with snow buntings in them. There's not enough, as far as I'm concerned. We need more snow buntings.
Can I tell you that we made sure that every single scientific detail in this book is accurate. So the little bird brings a twig and she leaves it as a gift for the little iceberg. Originally, the twig was lavender, but then we said lavender doesn't grow in the Arctic, so it changed to saxifrage. We had a member of our team who we appointed as the scientific advisor, and he made sure that snow bunting.
That's accurate. I know my birds. That's accurate. I can identify that as a snow bunting. And also the Arctic. I mean, the metaphor of the Arctic. Just explain that one a little bit more, which is mentioned in the companion. But why did you choose the Arctic?
You know what? If I just read a teeny bit from the book.
Yeah.
The water stretched for as far as the eye could see. In this grand and majestic ocean, there floated a speck, a jagged piece of something, I don't know what, but it most definitely was. In this grand and majestic ocean floated an iceberg. And so what we were trying to capture, and you'll see that all the pictures are really blue, they're melancholic blue. We were trying to capture a sense of children who are floating in a sea of people who feel lost and unheard and unnoticed. And indeed, part of the story says, no one really notices much. Icebergs come in all sizes, all shapes in the ocean. And so this sense of being lost, disconnected, having once belonged to an ice shelf that you're now parted from, gives a sense of how lonely and lost a child can be. We need to put words to that. We need to give children ways to talk about that. And so a metaphoric story helps you to do that. And what I can tell you is that by the time we get to the end, I know I'm giving away.
Spoiler alert.
Beautiful color and hope in the story. And Sylvia, our illustrator, captured Nicky's story beautifully in that regard.
It is. I mean, the melancholy if you can see that in the face, I just find it so moving. But then the color of when the bunting arrives with the saxifrage, and then moving into the color when she becomes part of the ocean and the rainbows and the whales, and it's just amazing.
One of the joys of this book was seeing the way in which Sylvia was able to bring Nicky's story to life by putting it on the page. Very often, I think, with storybooks, we think about the person who wrote the story, and that's really important. But with children's books, it's just as important to think about the impact of the illustrations. So the combination of this gave this story a whole new depth. And I'll just keep saying we've been delighted by the way schools have embraced it, that they've turned it into whole school projects. And we hope that, especially being here, more people will know about it and maybe will choose to do that if it helps with children recover from this time of loss and parting and difficulty. Because if you don't pay attention to this, children will carry the consequences of this lockdown time in their biology if we don't help them to recover.
Absolutely. And we've talked about on a couple of occasions in these conversations, epigenetics, and how that a trauma in one generation can be passed through the genes to future, to 2-3 generations ahead. We need to work on this now.
Ian, there's lots of science that now tells us that there are families who are carrying the genetic consequences of World War I and World War II because the trauma of that affected their family. And therefore, our society as a whole was affected because so many people were affected by those historic events. COVID's the same. So many people have been affected by the stress of COVID. If we don't pay attention to this, then our children carry that in their biology, particularly the children, because their biology is developing so quickly. We can help them to recover, but not if we don't take the need for that recovery seriously.
Yeah, and this is such a beautiful way of addressing that need. And then, as you said at the beginning, schools using it with the teachers' natural creativity unleashed, using it in so many different ways, the ways that you couldn't have possibly foreseen, but you've given them the stimulus. It's amazing, it's beautiful. Thank you.
I put out on Twitter several of the videos that schools have made. I've put out a big long list. So if you just look at Connected Baby's Twitter feed, you'll find lots of insight.
So give us your contact details, so social media and the website. Did you make the book available via the Roving Bookshop bookstore as well for this? Yes, so
yes.
People can get it there. But how can they find out about you and your work and the book, Susan?
So if you follow, we're on connectedbaby.net. And you can follow us on Twitter at Connected Baby. You can also follow me at Suzanne Zeedyk. The website, you can order direct from us, or you can order from roving bookshops. And can I tell you, some people have ordered big boxes of the books. In Derbyshire, we had an order of 500 books because they were giving them to lots of foster carers. And others have just ordered one for their child. We're happy whether it's a big box or little box, but you can get them from us or Roving Books, and tell other people about them too.
We will. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It's so even before the pandemic, where I first came across your work, it's so important, and it's critically important now. So thank you, and good luck with the book, and keep up the good work, Suzanne. Nice to meet you finally.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye.